Dick Van Dyke's forgotten sitcom comeback holds bizarre secrets. A desert filming location chosen to satisfy the star's desert lifestyle. A banned sex episode that destroyed creator relationships. A pianist who lost his finger days before filming started. And the groundbreaking pregnancy storyline CBS tried to bury. These stunning revelations reveal why this innovative series became TV's most fascinating failure. Fact 1. CBS built a TV studio in the Arizona desert for Van Dyke. When CBS executives desperately wanted Dick Van Dyke to return to television in 1971, they faced an unexpected obstacle. Van Dyke had moved to Cave Creek, Arizona, and absolutely refused to relocate back to Hollywood. Most networks would have simply moved on to another star. But CBS was so determined to get Van Dyke back on the air that they agreed to an extraordinary arrangement. The network would film the entire series at Southwestern Studio on Stage 1 in nearby Carefree, Arizona, a small desert town about 30 miles north of Phoenix. This meant that the entire Los Angeles-based cast and crew had to commute regularly to the Arizona desert for production. The logistics were complicated and expensive, requiring constant travel for performers and technicians who were all based in California. Production began in January of 1971 and wrapped in late August, with everyone making the trek between LA and Arizona throughout the filming period. The Carefree studio was originally started by veteran Hollywood stuntman Fred Graham, who had appeared in nearly every John Wayne movie and suffered 11 concussions across 175 pictures. When Graham moved to Arizona in 1970, he worked to bring more film productions to the area, and CBS became his biggest client. The 47-acre site included sound stages and even a western town. For the first 2 seasons, this unusual arrangement continued, with the show being one of the few major network sitcoms filmed entirely outside of California. However, when the show was retooled for its 3rd season in 1973, production finally moved back to Hollywood, ending one of television's most unique filming arrangements. Fact 2. Van Dyke used his own radio station's call letters. Dick Van Dyke's character on the new Dick Van Dyke Show was Dick Preston, a local television talk show host at KK4 TV in Phoenix, Arizona. What most viewers never realized was that KK4 wasn't just a made-up call sign for the show. It was actually the real call letters of a Phoenix radio station that Dick Van Dyke himself co-owned. Van Dyke was principal in K14 Incorporated and owned 1400 AM K14 in Phoenix from 1965 through 1982, operating it with business partner Ira Levin. The station broadcast a middle-of-the-road music format and featured disc jockeys including George Scott, Jack Day, Jim Hutton, Paul B. Munt, and Jim Sparrow, who also served as program director. By using his actual radio station's call letters for the fictional TV station where his character worked, Van Dyke created a fascinating blur between his real business interests and his television persona. The station had been on the air since 1954, when it originally signed on as Coney, the 9th radio station in Phoenix. It became K20 in 1961, just as Van Dyke's original Dick Van Dyke Show was beginning its legendary run. Van Dyke and Levin sold K20 in 1982 to local real estate developer Michael Levin, who relaunched it with a news and talk format as KSUN. The station still broadcasts today, now featuring Spanish-language programming under the branding La Mejor. For fans watching the show in the early 70s, seeing K20 on their TV screens meant they were watching a station that actually existed in real life, though it was a radio station rather than a television station. Fact 3. Hope Lang was Mary Tyler Moore's real-life best friend. The casting of Hope Lang as Dick Van Dyke's new television wife created an unusual behind-the-scenes connection that few viewers knew about. Lang was actually close personal friends with Mary Tyler Moore, who had played Van Dyke's wife Laura Petrie on the original Dick Van Dyke Show from 1961 to 1966. Moore even wrote about their friendship in her autobiography titled After All, confirming that the 2 actresses had a genuine relationship outside of their work with Van Dyke. This meant that Van Dyke went from being married to one actress on television to being married to her real-life best friend on his next series. Lang came to the role fresh off winning 2 consecutive Emmy Awards for Outstanding Lead Actress in a comedy series for her performance on The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, which ran from 1968 to 1970. In fact, Lange's previous sitcom success made her an ideal choice to step into the role that audiences had so strongly associated with Mary Tyler Moore. When Van Dyke told Good Housekeeping in 1971 that he enjoyed working with Lange because she reminded him of his wife, he was referring to his then-wife, Margie Willett, not Mary Tyler Moore. However, many viewers at home still thought Van Dyke and Moore were married in real life even after Moore got her own legendary CBS sitcom in 1970. Van Dyke even admitted to Life magazine that his biggest worry was getting people to accept him with another TV wife, after his iconic pairing with Moore. The friendship between Lange and Moore added an interesting layer to the show's history, creating an invisible connection between Van Dyke's two most famous television marriages. Fact 4. The show's pilot was hidden until mid-season. The new Dick Van Dyke Show had one of the most unusual production schedules in television history, because the entire cast and crew had to commute from Los Angeles to carefree Arizona for filming. Production began in January of 1971 and wrapped completely in late August. This meant that all 24 episodes of the first season were filmed, edited, and ready to go before CBS even aired the first episode in September. Having all episodes finished before the premiere gave producer Carl Reiner and his team an extraordinary opportunity that most shows never have. They could watch all the episodes, evaluate them, and decide which order would work best for viewers. The team made a bold decision to hold back the pilot episode, titled Off and Running, until much later in the season. The pilot focused on Dick and Jenny Preston, discovering that Jenny was pregnant again after 18 years of marriage, a storyline the producers had originally planned to center the entire series around. However, during production, Reiner and his team realized that the pregnancy storyline was only good for a few episodes and wouldn't be strong enough to carry an entire series. They decided to air what they believed were the strongest episodes first, starting with Smoke Rings, which featured Dick's smoking habit being reignited after a gag on his show involving smoke rings and a chimpanzee. The pilot didn't air until November 27, 1971, as the 11th episode of the season. This allowed the show to establish itself with different types of stories before revealing the pregnancy plot. The unusual late-in-life pregnancy topic was actually quite progressive for 1971 television, predating the famous Maud abortion episode by a year. Fact 5. A banned sex episode ended Carl Reiner's career. In the third season of the new Dick Van Dyke Show, Carl Reiner wrote an episode titled Lieutenant Preston of the 4th Cavalry that would become one of the most controversial moments in the show's history. The episode featured a scene that took place off-camera where Annie, Dick, and Jenny's daughter accidentally walked in on her parents having sex. After the uncomfortable discovery, the parents tried to explain what their daughter had seen, and in the punchline, Annie giggled and said that they both looked funny. While the scene was handled with humor and the actual intimate moment happened off-screen, CBS executives refused to air the episode. The network claimed the content was incompatible with Dick Van Dyke's family-friendly image and would damage his wholesome reputation with viewers. Carl Reiner was absolutely furious at this decision. What made him even angrier was the hypocrisy he saw at CBS. At the same time the network was censoring his show, they were allowing other programs like All in the Family to deal with much more controversial topics, including racism, sexuality, and social issues. All in the Family even featured Reiner's own son Rob in the lead role, making the double standard even more personal. Reiner was so incensed by CBS's decision that he refused to continue working on the show beyond the third season. He went even further, vowing never to work in television again and specifically promising never to work with CBS again. This promise would eventually be broken when Reiner produced and starred in the failed sitcom Good Heavens in 1976, but the banned episode marked a permanent rift between Reiner and the network. The episode itself remained unaired for decades. Fact 6. Nancy Dussault was rejected for being too short. Nancy Dussault was a Broadway star with impressive credentials when Carl Reiner came to see her performing in a play in New York. Her musical comedy talents and stage presence made her seem like the perfect candidate to play Dick Van Dyke's wife on the new Dick Van Dyke Show. The The producers were so interested that they flew Dussault from New York to a Beverly Hills hotel, putting her up in one of the big cottages typically reserved for important meetings. Dussault had received Tony Award nominations in 1961 for Best Featured Actress in a Musical for Do Re Mi and another nomination for her performance in Bonjour in 1965. She seemed ideal for the role, having proven she could handle comedy, music, and hold her own alongside major stars. However, there was one problem the producers couldn't overlook. At 5 feet 1 inch tall, Dussault was significantly shorter than the 6'1" Dick Van Dyke. During the audition process, Dussault remembered the producers kept moving her across the room, trying different positions to see if they could make the height difference work. Finally, they told her directly that she was too short to play Van Dyke's spouse on camera. The height disparity would be too visually jarring for audiences. However, Dussault's talent was too significant for the show to pass up entirely. As she recalled, the producers called her back and said they wanted her to do a little part on the show instead. She was cast as Carol Davis, the wife of Dick's manager Bernie, and became a series regular for the first 2 seasons. Dussault appeared in 48 episodes from 1971 to 1973, and later found even greater sitcom fame as Ted Knight's wife on Too Close for Comfort, which ran from 1980 to 1987. Fact 7. A car accident destroyed the lead actor's piano career. Marty Brill was cast as Bernie Davis, Dick Preston's manager and close friend on the new Dick Van Dyke Show. What made Brill's casting special was his background as a real concert pianist. The writers and producers planned to incorporate his musical abilities into the character, creating storylines around Bernie's piano talents. However, tragedy struck before filming even began. On his way to Arizona for the very first rehearsal of the series, Brill was involved in a serious car accident. The crash resulted in Brill losing a finger, a devastating injury for any pianist, but especially catastrophic for someone whose musical skills were about to become a key part of their television character. Producer Bernie Orenstein, who worked closely with the show's creative team, later revealed that he never knew Marty before he came on the show and that Carl Reiner had hired him. When Brill arrived for rehearsals after the accident, the entire creative team had to completely rethink the character. They were forced to rewrite Bernie Davis's part because Brill could no longer play the piano at a professional level with a missing finger. The writers had to abandon all the storylines they had planned around his concert pianist background. According to Orenstein, about halfway through the series, it became acceptable for Brill to nibble on the keys and play a little bit. But he was missing what Orenstein called the serious finger necessary for real piano performance. Despite this physical disability, Brill's comedic ability remained completely intact. His pitch-perfect chemistry with Nancy Dussault, who played his wife Carol, became one of the show's highlights. Brill successfully played the role for 48 episodes across the first 2 seasons, proving that he was much more than just his piano skills. Fact 8. The show tackled late-in-life pregnancy before anyone else. The new Dick Van Dyke Show was originally conceived around a groundbreaking storyline that television had never really explored before. The pilot episode revealed that Jenny Preston, played by Hope Lang, was pregnant again at age 38 after 18 years of marriage. The show's creators wanted to focus on how a couple in their late 30s would cope with the unexpected news of having to raise another baby when they thought their child-rearing years were behind them. This topic was genuinely revolutionary for 1971 television. The episode didn't just present the pregnancy as happy news. Jenny's initial reaction was disappointment and even distress at the prospect of starting over with a new baby. This honest portrayal of mixed feelings about pregnancy was both hilarious and truthful for the time, showing a side of motherhood that television rarely acknowledged. The episode addressed the real anxieties and challenges of late-in-life pregnancy before it became a common topic in later decades. What made this even more significant was the timing. The new Dick Van Dyke Show premiered in September of 1971, and the pregnancy episode aired in November of that year. This was a full year before the famous Maude abortion episode that would shock television audiences in 1972. While Maude's episode became more famous for its controversy, the new Dick Van Dyke Show was actually ahead of the curve in addressing reproductive topics honestly. The show went on to feature the birth storyline, with Jenny giving birth to a son named Chrissy during season 1. The series even featured an episode where Jenny picked up a pregnant, unmarried hitchhiker, and both women went into labor, further pushing boundaries about how pregnancy and family were portrayed on family-friendly television in the early 70s. Fact 9. The entire cast was fired after season 2. The new Dick Van Dyke Show enjoyed decent ratings during its first season when it aired on Saturday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. The show had a coveted time slot in CBS's highly rated Saturday night lineup, appearing alongside powerhouse shows including All in the Family, Funny Face, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show, which starred Van Dyke's former co-star. However, the show's ratings were noticeably lower than the program surrounding it. When the second season began, CBS made a fateful decision to move the show to the network's low-rated Sunday night lineup, and the ratings absolutely plummeted. The network executives wanted to cancel the new Dick Van Dyke Show entirely, but they faced a significant problem. CBS had been so eager to get Dick Van Dyke back on television that they had signed him to a 3-year contract, and they were legally obligated to honor that commitment. Since they couldn't cancel the show, CBS decided to completely retool it instead. For the third season, everything changed. The show's production moved from carefree Arizona back to Hollywood, California. The entire premise shifted as Dick and his family relocated to Los Angeles after Dick landed a role as Dr. Brad Fairmont on a fictional medical soap opera called Those Who Care. Then came the mass firing. With the exception of Dick Van Dyke himself, Hope Lang, who played his wife Jenny, and Angela Powell, who played their daughter Annie, none of the other original cast members appeared in season 3. Marty Brill, Nancy Dussault, Todd, Fannie Flagg, David Doyle, and Michael Shea all lost their jobs as the show attempted to reinvent itself. The entire supporting cast that audiences had gotten to know over 2 seasons was gone, replaced by completely new characters and actors for the show's final year. Fact 10. Richard Dawson and Cheetah Rivera joined as new neighbors. When the new Dick Van Dyke Show underwent its massive retooling for season 3, the producers brought in an entirely new supporting cast to populate Dick's Hollywood life. Among the most notable additions were Richard Dawson and Cheetah Rivera, who played the Prestons' new neighbors Richard and Connie Richardson. At the time, Richard Dawson was already becoming known to television audiences, but hadn't yet achieved the massive fame he would later gain as the host of Family Feud starting in 1976. Dawson appeared in 7 episodes during the show's 3rd season, playing opposite Cheetah Rivera in the neighbor roles. Cheetah Rivera brought legitimate Broadway star power to the series. Rivera was actually Dick Van Dyke's friend and former co-star from the original Broadway production of Bye Bye Birdie, where she had created the role of Rosie Alvarez, opposite Van Dyke's Albert Peterson. That show had opened on Broadway in 1960 and won 4 Tony Awards, including Best Featured Actor in a Musical for Van Dyke himself. Having Rivera join the cast created a full-circle moment, reuniting Van Dyke with someone from his Broadway breakthrough nearly 13 years later. The new Season 3 cast also included Dick Van Patten as Max Mathias, Dick's new boss and producer on the soap opera. Barry Gordon joined as Dennis Whitehead, a writer on the show, and Henry Darrow played Alex Montanez, the stage manager. Barbara Rush appeared as Margot Brighton, a daytime drama diva and star on the soap opera. These new cast members were meant to represent Dick's professional world in Hollywood and create fresh dynamics for the series. However, despite these talented additions and the show's improved ratings in Season 3, the changes came too late to save the series from cancellation. Fact 11. Van Dyke's real-life children all appeared on the show. The new Dick Van Dyke Show became something of a family affair when all 4 of Dick Van Dyke's real-life children made appearances throughout the series. This created touching moments where Van Dyke got to work alongside his actual kids while playing a father on television. Barry Van Dyke, who would later become the most famous of Dick's children in show business, appeared the most frequently. He showed up in 9 episodes across all 3 seasons, playing multiple different roles, including an announcer, a character named Barry, a bodyguard, a cyclist, Dan Preston, an intern, a slate man, and characters named Tash Douglas and Tash Howard. Barry's varied appearances showed his versatility and gave him valuable experience that would later serve him well when he co-starred with his father in The Van Dyke Show in 1988 and the hugely successful Diagnosis Murder from 1993 to 2001. Carrie Beth Van Dyke also made appearances on the show. In one episode titled Everything from A to Z, she played a character named Carrie, and she appeared in another episode called The Power of the Bleep as a Girl Scout. Stacey Van Dyke and Chris Van Dyke, Dick's other two children, also made guest appearances during the series' run. Having his real children appear on the show added an extra layer of authenticity to Van Dyke's portrayal of a family man, even though they weren't playing his character's actual children. Producer Bernie Orenstein and writer Saul Turteltaub, along with other crew members, witnessed firsthand how Dick Van Dyke's family became integrated into the show's production, making it a genuine family experience both on and off camera throughout the show's 3-season run. Fact 12. The show featured television's most progressive storylines. While the new Dick Van Dyke Show is often remembered as a failed attempt to recapture the magic of the original series, it actually pushed boundaries with surprisingly progressive storylines that were controversial for early 1970s television. The show tackled social issues that most family-friendly sitcoms of the era avoided completely. One episode titled Midterm Dinner featured the Prestons' 16-year-old son Dan bringing his African-American girlfriend Judy home for dinner. This episode about interracial dating aired on October 2, 1971, at a time when such relationships were still illegal in some states and deeply controversial throughout much of America. The episode forced the older members of the Preston family to examine their own beliefs and prejudices. Another groundbreaking episode called The Harry Award dealt directly with racial discrimination and segregation. In this story, Dick was excited to receive a prestigious award as an outstanding television personality. But his attitude changed completely when he learned the award ceremony would be held at a country club that practiced racial discrimination. The episode showed Dick wrestling with whether to accept the honor given the venue's bigoted policies. The show also addressed the topic of childless marriages in an episode called The Split, where Dick's friends Bernie and Carol temporarily separated over whether to have children. This storyline acknowledged that not all couples agreed on having kids and that such disagreements could seriously threaten marriages. These storylines were remarkably bold for a show starring Dick Van Dyke, whose image was strongly associated with wholesome family entertainment. The fact that CBS allowed these episodes to air while simultaneously banning the episode about parents having sex revealed the complicated and sometimes hypocritical standards networks applied to controversial content during this era. Fact 13. The Phoenix House became more famous than the show. While the new Dick Van Dyke Show struggled to find an audience, one aspect of the series developed an almost cult-like following among viewers. The Prestons' spectacular house in Phoenix became so beloved that some people admitted they watched the show primarily for the interior design rather than the comedy. The Arizona home featured a stunning sunken living room with multiple conversation areas, light-colored walls that were considered avant-garde for the early 70s, and an innovative adobe fireplace. The staircase became legendary among fans, with many calling it the most beautiful, informal staircase ever seen on television. The house exuded what viewers described as a comfortable American affluence, creating spaces that looked incredibly inviting. One fan described feeling like you could just sit around in the house and eat a dinner comprised of 40 pounds of prime rib with baked Alaska for dessert. The design included a master bedroom on the main level of the house, which was an unusual choice for the time period when most homes had all bedrooms on an upper floor. The sofa was praised as second to none, and the overall aesthetic captured the Southwestern modernism that was becoming popular in the early 70s. When the show moved to Hollywood for its third season and Dick's family relocated to California, the new house featured a nice open staircase, but was nowhere near as breathtaking as the Phoenix home according to devoted viewers. Fans even compared it unfavorably to the original Dick Van Dyke Show house in Connecticut, noting that while that earlier home was open and executive-looking, it was too linked to early 60s decor and lacked the warmth of the Arizona house. Decades later, People still remember the Phoenix house more vividly than specific episodes or storylines, proving that sometimes production design can overshadow the actual content of a television show. Fact 14. CBS had Van Dyke trapped in a 3-year contract. When CBS executives set out to bring Dick Van Dyke back to television in 1971, they were so anxious to secure his return that they made him an offer that seemed generous at the time, but would later become problematic. The network signed Van Dyke to a 3-year contract, guaranteeing that he would star in the new Dick Van Dyke Show for at least 3 full seasons, regardless of ratings or creative issues. This was a pay-or-play deal, meaning CBS had to compensate Van Dyke whether the show succeeded or failed. During the show's first season, the ratings were decent though not spectacular, and the unusual arrangement seemed like it might work out. However, when the show moved to CBS's low-rated Sunday night lineup for Season 2, the ratings completely collapsed. Network executives looked at the numbers and wanted to cancel the new Dick Van Dyke Show immediately. Unfortunately for CBS, they couldn't simply pull the plug. The 3-year contract they had signed with Van Dyke meant they were legally obligated to keep the show on the air and continue paying everyone involved. This forced CBS to make the best of a bad situation. Rather than canceling the show outright, they decided to completely retool it for Season 3, moving production back to Hollywood, firing most of the cast, and changing the entire premise of the series. The network gave the show yet another time slot, placing it on Monday nights at 9:30 p.m. immediately following Here's Lucy, starring Lucille Ball, hoping that Ball's audience would provide a strong lead-in. While the ratings did improve somewhat in the 3rd season, the damage was done. After fulfilling his 3-year obligation, Dick Van Dyke chose not to renew his contract, and the show was finally canceled after 72 episodes across 3 seasons. Fact 15. The Band episode. Finally aired 30 years later. The controversial episode Lieutenant Preston of the 4th Cavalry remained in television limbo for decades after CBS refused to air it in 1974. The episode where daughter Annie accidentally walked in on her parents having sex was deemed too inappropriate for Dick Van Dyke's wholesome image, and the network worried it would damage the show's family-friendly reputation after the new Dick. Van Dyke Show ended its run in 1974. The series was rarely seen in syndication. Various local stations aired it occasionally throughout the 1970s, but the show never achieved the constant rerun presence that the original Dick Van Dyke Show enjoyed. In the early 1990s, reruns aired briefly on TNT, but again, the Band episode was not included in the package. In 2002, TV Land aired the Christmas episode titled The Jailbird as part of their traditional classic Christmas show marathon, but Lieutenant Preston of the 4th Cavalry remained unseen. Finally, in 2004, something remarkable happened. The show began airing on Good Life TV network, and the network executives made the decision to include every episode in their rerun package. This meant that Lieutenant Preston of the 4th Cavalry would finally be broadcast to audiences 30 years after CBS had originally banned it. When viewers finally got to see the episode in 2004, they discovered a surprisingly tame storyline by modern standards. The actual intimate moment happened completely off camera, and the scene focused on the awkward aftermath when Annie backed out of the bedroom and her embarrassed parents tried to explain what she had seen. The episode's gentle humor and tasteful handling made CBS's original decision seem even more puzzling in retrospect, showing how much television standards had changed over 3 decades.